beginning, where did it start? What got you involved in music?
Well, Dharma, I guess we're going back to the late 50s, and anyone that can remember those times, music before that was really boring, and I hadn't any interest in listening to these ballad singers and songs from the musicals and stuff. It just washed over me. and then I was about, I don't know, 14 years old, and I started listening to rock and roll, and I heard Elvis Presley, and I heard Ray Charles, and I heard Little Richard.
And how'd you hear them? Was it on the radio? Was it on records?
It was on. You didn't get to hear much in England on the radio. We used to have Radio Luxembourg, which was really sort of crackly. So it's not like today where you could download stuff and you'd hear a weird name like Elvis Presley. What a strange name! And you couldn't just Google it or anything. It didn't exist. So you had to go and buy the record, and you played it. There were two-sided records, and you played it over and over and over again. And I just totally fell in love with music from that moment.
So you found on those records you had an A side and a B side of what it was, and you got to know the records, and so that record store probably was a place that you hang out a lot and go there and research artists.
Record stores are such cool places. You used to go and you got a little listening booth, and you could play like a whole lot of records, and then maybe buy none because you couldn't afford, or buy one, but you get to listen to loads. And we used to have things like coffee bars and rock and roll music has never sounded as good as it did then to me on an old Wurlitzer jukebox. They just sounded so great with that bass end thumping out.
So what happened when you heard this music? What happened that guided you towards drumming?
Well, I guess I did, I was far from being on my own at this time. There must have been thousands of kids who did exactly the same thing as me, and we formed a group at school. So we had a school group, and I think most schools had a bunch of kids who formed a group. The kind of weird thing for me, I was about, say, 15 by the time I started, and I decided I wanted to play drums. My father had died when I was 10 years old, and I didn't know much about him, to be honest. The weird thing for me is when I decided, me and my schoolmates, we were going to form this group at school, and we called ourselves Rocking Ronnie and the Renegades, which is pretty cool name. And I said, well, I want to play drums, right? And no one, I hadn't had a lesson or anything. And I went to my mum and said, Mum, I want to be a drummer, and there's a drum kit, I've seen it in Birmingham, and it's like £35. And this was a lot of money, and we hadn't got a lot of money. And my mum immediately said, yes, okay. And I went, wow, that was easy. And then I started playing. I found I could actually play. Not great, but I could keep time and play. And it was only then that my mother said, your dad was a drummer.
How powerful.
And I didn't know. And he had in the war years, he had like a little jazz band. And it was called the Bevan Trio, even though his name was Charles Thomas Bevan. And that's why I was nicknamed. And I was the original boy named Sue. My Christian name is Beverley. So I had to go. I went to school in Birmingham with a name Beverley, which got me into a lot of fights. And the only reason, that's why I was named, was just because of that.
It could have been worse than Beverly. It could have been Beverage.
So it could have been, yeah.
That's really, the bottom line is that you took this feeling and you started playing music. You started meeting different bands and forming bands, and did you start to imitate music you had heard?
Oh, totally. All we did was copy. And the way you got gigs in those days was by playing the top 20 records. You had to play. And in those days, it was a real variety of music. So you had to do, if Acker Bilk had a Stranger on the Shore or something was a hit record, you had to kind of do a version of it. You had to do, but it made you learn how to play different styles of music.
So you're hearing this music. Did you study with a teacher at all? Did you find other drummers in town or in the village here in Birmingham that you learned from? How did you kind of extract this knowledge? Because you're an incredible player, and naturally you really have this incredible feel that it's almost as if instead of you choosing the drums chose you to a certain degree,
Yeah, and I never did have a lesson, but I watched other people, and that's great advice. Just watch people play.
So were there a lot of bands playing around at that time?
there were in Birmingham. The great thing that we had, and I'm moving on a bit now into the mid '60s and stuff. There were hundreds of venues to play at. Every pub, every town had hundreds of pubs, and cities had hundreds of pubs. And there were dozens and dozens and dozens of pubs, and they all had live music. And so you had access to play these pubs. You could work. We would work 7 nights a week without any problem at all.
So how was it? When did you start like your real professional career? Where you started now, all of a sudden you're making money and you're working with these bands, and it became a business.
I was approached by a guy named Denny Lane, and who'd seen me in another band called the Senators, and he said, "I'd like you to, join. I'm going to start a new band, and we call it Denny Lane and the Diplomats." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "But I'm really serious about this business. I'm going to leave my job, and I'm going to be a professional." Nice. And I said, "Well, I want to do the same," and that's what we did. And we're talking 1963, 64, and we became quite popular around the Midlands. And the highlight, I guess, of our career was that we opened for the Beatles.
What year was that about?
That was 63. They were into about their second album. It was the height of Beatlemania. So
the Beatlemania was really in the UK at that time.
Yeah.
They were huge.
Yeah.
64 is when they went to the
That's
US.
right.
So you were at the really beginning stage of being able to catch that wave of insanity.
And I tell you, you'll like this story because it's a bit of a drummer story. That we were opening for the Beatles, and they'd played somewhere else before, so they're a bit late arriving. It was a place called the Old Hill Plaza, and we were on stage before them, and it was absolutely rammed, mainly full of girls, screaming girls. And we were only supposed to be doing half an hour, and they hadn't arrived, and we ended up doing over an hour, and we were running out of material, of stuff that we knew, and we did a version of Take 5, Dave Brubeck.
Brubeck, Joe Morello as the drummer, was my teacher,
Around 5/4 time.
Absolutely.
And as I'm playing this, and the Beatles had arrived, and I was aware that the Beatles were watching us from the side of the stage. And then at the end of it, the curtains closed, and it's the Beatles, and Paul McCartney walked over to me. I'm going, "Wow," and he goes, "Hey, that was great, that like drum solo in like 5/4 time. Our drummer could never do that." So I lived on that for years. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Dave Brubeck. So did you listen to much of the records of Dave Brubeck?
I did, yeah. I couldn't work out a lot of the timings on square dance and stuff like that. It was, woo.
Joe Morello was he was a teacher of mine. He was a very special man, and it was kind of interesting to have a band like that to play a jazz tune in 5/4. At that time, it was very, very ahead of its time. The fact that you guys listened to it and took that step, that's powerful that you had that kind of courage to even take that chance.
Yeah, as I said, it was a variety thing, and that was in the chart, so we thought we should do a version of it. Even though the piano part was played on guitar, but even so, it was our version of it.
How great! So now you're going on. So when did the move come into play? When did that start to happen?
The move came along. I joined another band called Carl Wayne and the Vikings, and we did that German stint, which the Beatles had done. That is hard work. That was like we used to do 7 45-minute spots a night and 10 45-minute spots at weekends.
Wow.
Yeah. So that again grounds you how to play. And we came back and we thought, well, that's a bit too much like hard work. And that's when we had the idea of forming a kind of a Birmingham supergroup. And it was started by the bass player Ace Keppert and one of the guitarists Trevor Burton, who saw David Bowie at a concert in Birmingham. And he was just starting to make it as Davy Jones in the lower fifth or something like that. But he was obviously going to be a big star. And Trevor and Ace went to speak to him and said, "Look, we want to be big stars like you're going to be. And, how do you do it?" And he said, "What you do, you find the best players in the city, put them together, work really, really hard, rehearse, get yourself down to London, get yourself a manager." And we took David Bowie's advice, and that's exactly what happened.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you followed that advice. The move's together. It's performing. You're doing it. You're playing. And were you still listening to other musicians to take from them? Were you still kind of evolving? Because your playing has gone through many stages.
Yeah, we went through when the move started, it was sort of psychedelia times.
Yeah.
We had an amazing tour. We toured with Hendrix for about 3 weeks, and we had it was Jimi Hendrix, The Move, Amen Corner, The Nice, Keith Weston Tomorrow, and right at the bottom of the bill, they were on for like 7 minutes, was Pink Floyd. They opened the show, did like 2 songs. That we did that every night for like 3 weeks.
Boy, imagine the legacy of history that you were part of in what was happening. And Jimi Hendrix, the fact that you had the chance to hear Jimi Hendrix and meet Mitch Mitchell, what a powerful band. What did that band do for you when you heard Jimi Hendrix and the band playing? The Hendrix experience.
Hendrix was, that was supposed to be a co-headline bill. Hendrix, well, he was Hendrix and The Move. We were co-headlining, but once we saw Hendrix perform, we said, we can't follow that. So we closed the first half and let him close the second half. I mean, what an amazing guy. He was off stage, the quietest, most well-mannered ex-serviceman, American. Yeah. Or a lady would come into the room, he used to stand up and take a chair and all that stuff. A real gentleman. Put him on stage, complete wild man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy, talk about that level of that you experienced. You're playing with The Move, you're doing. When did ELO come into the picture?
The Move started in. We had our first hit record in 1967. We had our last hit record in 1972, a song called California Man. And then Jeff Lynne came into The Move at the very end of it. Right. But he was not really interested in being in The Move at all. He wanted to form a new band. He was a massive Beatles fan. He loved all the stuff that the Beatles done in the studio.
And Jeff was also from Birmingham.
Yeah, another Birmingham guy. And he things like Strawberry Fields and I Am the Walrus, what the Beatles had done, Jeff wanted to do something like that and put it on the road. So we had a string section on the road, and that's how Electric Light Orchestra came about. And it was myself and Jeff and Roy Wood, and then we recruited various people around us.
And how many musicians would you have with the band at certain times, the average?
It ended up being 7 was a magic number, which was the basic rhythm section, really. So we had guitar, drums, bass, keyboards, and then we had 2 cellos and a violin.
How incredible. What a very different sound at that time.
Yeah.
To bring that together and have that playing. When you rehearsed, how were the rehearsals? How was working with the band? How was the intensity of touring? What was that like at the time? Because that was right in the core, the heart of the music industry's growth.
Yeah, you're talking about the mid-70s, and we first toured America, I think, in 1973, something like that. And our first major tour, playing the big arenas, was we were opening for Deep Purple. So but we did a major tour of America, 60 dates or something, and opening for Deep Purple. But it made us. The next time we went back, we had our first gold record, and we had our first hit records, and so we started headlining these stadiums. But we'd been there before with Deep Purple, so it was great. That was a great learning curve.
And how was it like when you first went to America to perform and experienced the size of America and the insanity of how the music was accepted then?
It is such a. America's not a country, is it? It's like a world. It's massive. You know, with the Move, we'd obviously toured Britain and we'd been to Europe, but we never. We went to we went to America once as the Move.
At the Move, yeah.
Yeah, and that was nice. It was 1969. And that's a story in itself. We flew to America, to New York. We drove to Detroit, a place called the Grandee Ballroom, and we opened for Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Yeah. And from Detroit, we actually drove Route 66, which not many people do, all the way to Los Angeles. And we got there and to play at the Whiskey A Go-Go.
Whiskey A Go-Go.
And it was the last night of Chaka Khan and Rufus, so we saw them play. We did the next 5, 6, 7 nights, and the Doors came to see us. Joni Mitchell came to see us. Graham Nash, and went back to her house and stuff. Then we went on to San Francisco, and we opened the show, and then it was Joe Cocker and Little Richard, and it was all in 3 weeks. And then we flew home, and next time I went back was about 4 years later.
What were you thinking about when you're in the presence of greatness at that level? What were you thinking about? What was going through your mind as a musician and from where you came from in Birmingham? What was in your head at that time?
I was just, you're right, at least it was a learning curve. I think a lot of the guys now that suddenly win Britain's Got Talent or whatever, they're just thrust onto this big stage. That one day they're nobody, really, and now they're playing in these massive arenas. They've got no experience. At least we'd done hundreds and thousands of gigs before we got to the big arenas.
But that's that line of understanding the know your instrument or the band, the 10,000 hours that you need to play. You did that, as the Beatles did that.
Yeah.
ELO now comes to the States, and you start traveling much more actively around the States. What was that like as far as experiencing that kind of touring?
Again, the tours built up and they got bigger and bigger. And the most famous one was the Out of the Blue tour, which was this. A lot of people think it's the most spectacular tour they've seen because it was a spaceship. It was the same time as Close Encounters, the movie. Yeah. And the whole set was this massive spaceship, like a giant hamburger, if you like. and it opened up, and there's all lasers and lots of smoke and lights and stuff. And all the band come up on like electric risers out of the.
Incredible.
And it was spectacular. And when it ended, and the whole thing closed down, there was no hint of an encore. That was the end of the show, and people generally went away going, "Wow."
With drumming specifically, the instrument has evolved and changed so much. So from the early days when you first got your first drum set to what evolved, you saw an incredible evolution of the modern drum set change.
Yeah.
I mean, the set that you have now compared to what you had then. Just talk about that a little bit for us.
Well, I think one of the greatest inventions is the double foot pedal.
The double pedal, yeah.
The double pedal, I used to, with Sabbath and stuff, I used to have two bass drums because that was the only way you could do it. And it's some genius put together this double bass drum pedal, so you only need one bass drum nowadays. I mean,
and you had two beaters and one pedal to play, but both of your feet could play on two different pedals.
Yeah.
But both beaters hit one bass drum.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's it. And when I look back on the tiny little kit I started out with, and the kits I played with ELO and Sabbath, they were just ginormous. Even with the gong and the timpani and everything, I had to be almost like lowered by a crane to get into the thing.
What was, if you think about a career highlight, is there one highlight that you can think of that really is in your mind that you just can relive that over and over? What highlight do you have?
I have a couple. It was with Black Sabbath when we headlined the Reading Festival in front of about 50,000 people. That was in 1984. But way before, and I guess 78 on that same ELO tour, and we did Anaheim Stadium in Los Angeles, and it was just so spectacular. We had Tony Curtis introduce us, and
the famous actor,
Tony Curtis, who sadly no longer with us. He was a good guy, and it started. It was the whole thing was a space age sort of idea, and they'd hired helicopters to fly over Anaheim Stadium, and they'd got guys jumping out with parachutes, pretending to be Star Troopers, and Tony Curtis was zapping them with his laser gun as they all landed in the stadium, and we had like Foreigner and Journey open for us, so two great bands.
Yeah,
and our after stage guests were like. Included the Jacksons. So I met Michael Jackson, and I think ABBA came along. It was just like amazing.
How incredible. So there are many highlights.
Yeah.
Are there any, I don't want to call it regrets, are there any down memories that you have, one that really sits in your mind that says, boy, I wish that had not happened? Or is there something that maybe even you could have prevented?
There's opportunities where I was... David Bowie and Lou Reed asked me to be on an album with them, and I just hadn't got the time to do it. David Coverdale asked me to join the original White Snake, which I think I would have loved, but again, I just couldn't have the time to do it. So no particular regrets, I don't think. I've made some mistakes, but but no regrets.
We all have, for sure.
Yeah.
But that's great. So with the intensity of your business and your career, the way it's going, to have that level of demand is absolutely incredible in what you have built up. In closing, and we have a room full of students here, what would you say to the students, to the next generation? What would you leave for them in the course of, and you're still going strong, stronger than ever with your band, what you're doing, the stand-up and rock. I think this is phenomenal with Jasper Carrot.
Yeah.
This is incredible what you're still doing.
Yeah, it's a great new concept, stand-up and rock, and it gives me the chance to play. This isn't a downside. This happens to anybody, anyone that has success in this business has to go on stage and play their hit songs. And you can't knock that, but you always have to do that. I did it with The Move, I did it with ELO, did it with Black Sabbath.
Over, night after
Overnight.
night.
And some of the songs maybe you don't like, but you got to do them.
Yeah.
With this stand-up and rock thing, we get to play a lot of the songs that I'd never played before, like a lot of Motown songs, a lot of Phil Spector songs.
Yeah.
And it's great, and it's such a pleasure just to play them, yes. Still.
Okay, but the Hal Blaine drumming songs that we heard all these songs, and when we realized that the 7 out of the top 10 favorite drummers that I had were Hal Blaine.
Yeah.
All those songs that he did, it really was pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're on this next two, we're doing Be My Baby,
Absolutely.
Boom, boom, flat, boom, 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 flat. Right. Yeah.
What would you leave for the students? What could you give them, a bit of information that you can tell them that can motivate or inspire them from what you have learned and what you continue doing? What could you give to them to raise them to a higher level of motivation?
Well, I just think you wouldn't be here unless you loved what you're going to do. That's the most important thing, is to love what you're doing. And if at any stage you think, I'm bored with this, well, do something else. You must persevere and do what you want to do. And just, it's a 24, you just listen to as much music as you can. Go and watch as many of your heroes as you can, and just learn and enjoy and improve. And with any luck, you'll have a career and a life that you're going to love.
Bev, you are a gentleman, a true gentleman. On behalf of the sessions, we ask you all to please give a great round of applause to the legendary Bev Bevan.
Thank you.